The desert sky above Iran split open in fire. In the dead of night, the silence was shattered by the thunder of engines and the sudden flash of explosions tearing through some of the most heavily guarded sites in the world. Deep underground facilities, once thought untouchable, shook as walls cracked and flames burst from hidden entrances. Sirens wailed in every direction. Residents in nearby towns poured into the streets, staring upward at streaks of light cutting across the heavens. It was the beginning of Operation Midnight Hammer, America's most secret and most dangerous mission in decades. The targets were not ordinary military outposts. They were the crown jewels of Iran's nuclear program, Natanz, Fordow, and others buried beneath mountains of reinforced concrete. For years, Iran had pushed forward with uranium enrichment, ignoring warnings, defying inspectors, and edging closer to the red line that Washington and Tel Aviv had sworn never to allow. Diplomacy had stalled. Negotiations collapsed into dead silence, and so the United States chose force. Stealth bombers, flying low and unseen, released precision-guided weapons designed to pierce the earth itself. Drones hovered above the targets, feeding real-time imagery back to command centers thousands of miles away. Cyber units attacked Iran's air defenses, blinding radars and silencing communications. In minutes, sites that had taken decades to build were engulfed in chaos. For those on the ground, the experience was apocalyptic. Tremors shook homes miles away. Windows burst under the pressure wave. Flames reached into the night sky, and the sound of collapsing structures echoed through the valleys. Within hours, Iranian state television confirmed what the world already suspected. The United States had struck directly at Iran's nuclear program. In Washington, officials described it as a decisive blow. In Tehran, leaders called it an act of war. And across the globe, fear spread that the world had just taken its first step toward World War III. Where are you watching this from right now? Tell us, because the events unfolding in the Middle East tonight may reshape the entire future of global security, and this is only the beginning. For months, the signs had been building. Western intelligence agencies tracked shipments of advanced centrifuge parts slipping into Iran through hidden channels. Satellite images showed construction at sites long suspected of housing nuclear facilities. Inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency were denied access or misled with partial information. Every report from the region carried the same warning. Tehran was closer than ever to crossing the threshold. In Washington, the briefings grew darker with each passing week. Analysts warned that diplomacy had reached a dead end. Sanctions no longer slowed the program. Negotiations with European partners had collapsed into bitter disagreements. Israel sent urgent cables, warning that time was running out. Mossad sources whispered of enriched uranium stockpiles that could soon be turned into a weapon. The message was clear: if the world waited, Iran would become a nuclear power. Behind the scenes, secret meetings unfolded in underground bunkers. Generals laid out strike options, each one more dangerous than the last. Planners spoke of stealth bombers carrying bunker-busting munitions, of cyber units primed to cripple Iranian radars and communications, of drone swarms designed to confuse and overwhelm defenses. It would not be a single strike, but a coordinated assault, surgical in execution, devastating in effect. Code-named Midnight Hammer, the operation was built around speed and secrecy. The fewer who knew, the safer it would be. Even some NATO allies were left in the dark. For weeks, squadrons trained quietly at undisclosed locations. Tankers were pre-positioned across the Gulf. Submarines carrying cruise missiles slid into silent patrols. Cyber teams rehearsed electronic blackouts, practicing how to shut Iran's defenses down in seconds. The final decision came after a stormy debate inside the White House Situation Room. Some advisors urged caution, fearing the consequences of striking a sovereign nation so directly. Others argued that inaction was more dangerous, that allowing Iran to reach the nuclear threshold would set the entire Middle East on fire. In the end, the decision was sealed with a single sentence: "We cannot allow them to finish the bomb." Orders were given. Sealed envelopes were distributed to commanders. And in the days before the strike, a strange silence fell across the military machine. An unnatural calm before a storm no one could stop. Pilots strapped into their cockpits, knowing they might not return. Cyber specialists typed the last lines of code that would plunge Iranian systems into darkness. Warships drifted silently in the Gulf, their missile tubes already primed. And then, in one single night, the hammer fell. The night chosen for the strike was moonless, the desert sky over Iran dark and silent. Then, in an instant, silence turned to fury. Low over the mountains, B-2 stealth bombers crossed the horizon, their black shapes invisible to radar but carrying weapons designed to pierce the deepest bunkers on Earth. Drones, already circling high above, relayed targeting data as cyber units launched their assault, flooding Iranian defense networks with false signals. Radars blinked and went blind. Communications fell silent. For precious minutes, the sky belonged entirely to the attackers. The first targets were the crown jewels, Natanz and Fordow. At Natanz, where Iran had buried its centrifuges under reinforced layers of steel and concrete, the ground shuddered as massive GBU-57 bunker-busting bombs slammed downward, carving through rock before erupting in blasts that lit the desert like day. At Fordow, dug deep into a mountain, precision-guided munitions hammered its entrances and ventilation shafts, choking the underground facility in fire and dust. Elsewhere, explosions ripped through Arak, Isfahan, and Parchin. Fuel depots ignited in rolling fireballs. Secondary targets, air defense batteries, command posts, radar stations, were hit with cruise missiles launched from submarines in the Gulf. Iranian air defenses fired wildly into the night, filling the sky with tracer fire, but most missiles found only empty air. By the time commanders realized what was happening, the first wave was already gone, slipping back into the darkness. On the ground, the destruction was overwhelming. Workers at Natanz stumbled through choking smoke, alarms howling, the reinforced roof above them cracking under the weight of shock waves. In Tehran, residents awoke to the distant rumble of detonations and the eerie silence that followed as the city's power grid flickered. Across Iran, social media filled with shaky footage of fiery streaks tearing through the night, followed by the thunder of impacts miles away. By dawn, the world knew. Iran's state media confirmed that several of its nuclear facilities had been attacked. Officials called it an act of war, vowing that Tehran would respond with force. Crowds gathered in the streets chanting revenge, burning American and Israeli flags as Revolutionary Guard commanders promised retaliation. In Washington, the first statements were cautious. Officials described the operation as necessary, decisive, and precise. They claimed it had set back Iran's nuclear program by years. But even as the words were spoken, intelligence reports warned that Tehran was already preparing to strike back, mobilizing missile units, calling militias in Iraq and Syria to arms, and placing its naval forces on high alert in the Gulf. The hammer had fallen, but now came the echo. In Tehran, the shock of the strikes turned almost instantly into fury. Within hours, the supreme leader appeared on state television, his voice hard and defiant. He declared that America had committed a crime against the Iranian nation, a crime that would not go unanswered. The Revolutionary Guard issued a statement promising swift, direct, and crushing retaliation. Crowds surged into the streets of the capital, waving flags and chanting, "Death to America," as bonfires lit the night. For many Iranians, the strike was not just an attack on facilities, it was an attack on sovereignty, on pride, on survival itself. Across the country, the military went to its highest alert in years. Missile batteries were rolled out of underground silos. Naval forces swarmed into the Strait of Hormuz, preparing to threaten one of the world's most vital shipping routes. Drones were armed and positioned, ready to launch at American bases scattered across Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf. Hezbollah and other proxy forces across the region received coded instructions, activating networks that had been waiting for this moment. The first wave of retaliation came swiftly. Barrages of rockets and drones targeted U.S. installations in Iraq, forcing American troops into bunkers as alarms screamed through the night. In Syria, forward operating bases were struck by loitering munitions, damaging barracks and wounding dozens. In the Gulf, Iranian missiles were launched toward Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the very nerve center of U.S. operations in the Middle East. Some were intercepted, others crashed into the sprawling compound, sending fire and smoke into the desert sky. In Washington, the Situation Room was gripped by panic. Military advisors scrambled to assess the scale of damage, while intelligence chiefs warned that Iran was not finished. The president demanded options: strike harder or hold back and prevent escalation. Hawks in the room argued for immediate retaliation, calling for the destruction of Iran's missile sites and naval forces before they could launch again. Doves warned that such a move would trigger a regional war, dragging in Israel, Hezbollah, and perhaps even Russia. On Capitol Hill, the political firestorm ignited. Some senators thundered that America must finish the job and crush Iran's capabilities once and for all. Others accused the administration of recklessly lighting the fuse of World War III. Cable news filled with images of burning bases and raging protests in Tehran, accompanied by pundits asking the same chilling question: what comes next? For U.S. allies, the situation was equally dire. Israel praised the operation, but braced for Hezbollah's missiles from Lebanon. European leaders pleaded for restraint, terrified that oil prices would skyrocket if the Gulf descended into war. In Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, governments feared becoming collateral damage as Iran's anger spread across the region. The air was thick with dread. Operation Midnight Hammer had achieved its immediate goal, crippling Iran's nuclear program. But in its wake, the Middle East was on fire. America had struck hard, and now Iran was striking back. The ripples of Operation Midnight Hammer spread far beyond the deserts of Iran. In the Strait of Hormuz, oil tankers slowed their passage, their crews terrified that missiles or sea mines could be waiting. Insurers hiked premiums overnight, and the price of crude spiked on global markets, rattling economies already strained by inflation. Energy ministers in Europe and Asia gathered in emergency sessions, calculating how long their reserves would last if the Gulf turned into a war zone. Israel braced for the inevitable. Along its northern border, Hezbollah began mobilizing. Thousands of rockets were rolled into launch positions, and intelligence reports warned of Iranian precision missiles prepared to strike Tel Aviv and Haifa. Israeli jets screamed into the skies, ready to intercept, while Iron Dome batteries lit up the night with tests. In Jerusalem, officials declared solidarity with Washington, but privately they feared what a full-scale regional war would mean for their cities. In the Gulf, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates faced their own nightmare. They had quietly supported America's strike, hoping it would cut Iran down to size, but now they stood directly in the crosshairs. Their oil facilities, ports, and cities were within easy reach of Iranian drones and missiles. Leaders in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi called Washington for guarantees of protection. their voices heavy with the fear that they might pay the price for a war they hadn't started. Meanwhile, in Moscow and Beijing, the reaction was swift and opportunistic. Russia denounced the strikes as imperial aggression, using its platforms at the UN to rally condemnation of Washington. Yet, behind the speeches, Kremlin officials quietly celebrated. America was now bogged down in another Middle Eastern firestorm, distracted from Ukraine and NATO's eastern flank. China, too, condemned the operation, presenting itself as the voice of restraint while studying every detail of the strikes. Analysts in Beijing examined how U.S. stealth bombers, cyber warfare, and precision weapons had been used, lessons that could one day be applied in a conflict over Taiwan. For ordinary people across the Middle East, the fear was immediate and personal. Families stocked food and water, bracing for shortages. Airports filled with panicked travelers desperate to escape the region. Markets in Tehran shut down, prices of basic goods doubling overnight. In Baghdad and Damascus, American troops hunkered down, knowing every convoy, every patrol could be a target. The world stood on the edge of a knife. One more strike, one more miscalculation, and the conflict could spread uncontrollably. Energy markets would crash, alliances could fracture, and rival powers might be drawn in. Operation Midnight Hammer had crippled Iran's nuclear ambitions, but at the cost of opening a doorway to a war that could consume not just the Middle East, but the balance of power across the globe. The fires still burned across the Iranian desert long after the last American bomber slipped back into the night. At Natanz, Fordow, and other shattered facilities, smoke poured from the ruins, mingling with the sound of sirens and the shouts of rescue crews digging through rubble. For years, these sites had symbolized Iran's defiance, its march toward nuclear power. In a single night, they had been struck with unprecedented force. But victory came with a price. Across the Middle East, the atmosphere was electric with rage and fear. Tehran vowed revenge, its allies already mobilizing. U.S. bases braced for more missiles, Israel prepared for Hezbollah's fire, and Gulf states wondered how long they could avoid becoming battlefields themselves. The strike that crippled Iran's nuclear program had also shattered the illusion of stability. In Washington, leaders spoke of precision and necessity, yet their voices carried the weight of dread. Because everyone understood the truth, once a hammer falls, the echo cannot be controlled. Operation Midnight Hammer had achieved its tactical goals, but strategically, it had thrown the region, and perhaps the world, into the unknown. The haunting image remains. Fire lighting the desert night, the earth shaking as nuclear facilities crumble, and the uneasy silence afterward, broken only by vows of vengeance. Was this the blow that secured peace, or the spark that will ignite a war without end? What do you think? Was Operation Midnight Hammer a necessary strike to stop a nuclear threat, or has it pushed the world one step closer to World War III?